being Filipino or the identity of being Filipino is not monolithic.
Getting someone into the conversation about what it means to be Filipino is completely different than someone who's been in this conversation for 5, 6, 7 years.
Growing up, I never had any sort of media where I could learn about Filipino history.
I know that one of the topics that you've all been really talking about on One Down is the subject of defining and redefining what it means to be a Filipino. And I find this topic to be fascinating because so many Filipino Americans deal with, not only a crisis of identity in the media, but also a lot of us lack that sense of belonging with other Filipinos. And I think when you go down to the root of this collective identity crisis, a big factor is the fact that a lot of Filipinos would just rather not talk about it, whether it is colorism, whether it is mental health, whether it is anti-Blackness, or it is religion. There are so many topics that Filipinos don't want to touch. Even though one of the biggest reasons why we feel disconnected are because of these issues. We're good about talking about Filipino achievements and Filipino people that we admire, but we also need to be able to keep that same energy for the problems within our community too. And you all know this, and this month you released a new series called Breaking the Taboo that discusses a lot of these topics, including anti-Blackness, including, whether or not Filipinos are considered Asian. So can you tell us a little bit more about this series, what it was like creating it, and which episode of Breaking the Taboo speaks to you all on a personal level?
Breaking the Taboo was such a trip. So just taking it as a media company, as a media company, how do you generate funds or money so that you're able to do this work? And most times it has to do by getting it sponsored or selling it as branded content, or getting the eyes of advertisers. And so that makes it very difficult when you're talking sensitive topics, because most companies don't want to necessarily get involved with things that are controversial, that are sensitive. But the way we approach it is advertisers aren't looking at Filipinos at the moment anyway. And these issues and topics aren't being told. So how do we as a platform shed light to these issues that we find important? And I'm going to start with lucky. We got lucky in the sense that we tested this format where, before we even did Breaking the Taboo, which, we actually created in February 2019 as a pitch, but we never fully developed it until maybe June of 2020.
Wow.
But we would test these, one-off videos where we started, in 2019 with doing a dance concept on mental health. And, organically, that did really well. So then we tried it again with colorism. And then we tried it again with anti-Blackness. And the anti-Blackness video got 500,000 views organically. So one thing with One Down, as far as being a data-focused company, we do not put any paid behind our reach, behind our views. They are completely organic. So all the views that you see on One Down are real people, real engagements, and real interest into these topics. So anti-Blackness in Filipino culture is extremely sensitive. People don't necessarily want to be called out. But the fact that we have 500,000 views on this subject gave us this idea. And so we wanted to develop an entire series that is devoted to talking about things that are essentially taboo within the Filipino culture. And so we started to develop these different topics. And just our pilot episode, which was the first one, which is Filipino representation in media and entertainment, that surpassed 2 million views organically, and it's on its way to 3 million. This was so pivotal and so powerful for us as validation that this community and this audience exists, and they want to be able to talk about these topics, and they're receptive towards it. And it really gave us, this encouragement that these stories are important. Now, the one important thing that I want to say when we do sensitive topics is that we as creators cannot be sensitive. These topics that we are choosing are important to people within the community. And I think it's important to really center on people at the margins. So, when we create these things, it's not, us just kind of doing it from our perspective. We really tried to research and reach out to the community so that we are taking lead from people who are the stakeholders, who are the drivers of these stories. Because, like you said, being Filipino or the identity of being Filipino is not monolithic. You know, my experience is not going to be the same as anyone else. So it really was this community effort in creating this series, because we brought on so many different people to speak on so many different perspectives. And, you know, we really tried to do our research. And, you know, the comments, they give us so many different ways in which we can improve, in which we can develop this further, and in ways that we can be even more inclusive. So I think the very important part as a media company is not to be sensitive, but to be very open, because, you know, we're all still learning these things and we're still growing. And so we're so happy to be challenged, and we're so happy to be more inclusive and, you know, be more representative for the people that this actually impacts.
And to your point about, you know, doing all of this organically, I mean, that for people who don't understand the difference between trying to, I mean, especially when it comes to topics that are considered taboo, the topics that advertisers shy away from, because it's difficult when you're trying to be real about the things that you and your community are wrestling with, yet you have this imbalance between, okay, well, we need to thrive as a company, we need to put food on the table, and that directly conflicts with what a lot of advertisers want. They want something to be as completely neutral as possible. But especially when we're in this, you know, unique time in America to be a Filipino American, it's sort of this, you know, now or never kind of a thing. And I'm glad that between the choice of putting out content that is friendly and advertiser friendly, which, you know, one could argue, okay, it might be the more commercially viable thing, but you are going the route that that I feel that you should be going. That is honest. That's something that you know, speaks to the conversations that actual Filipinos not what white advertisers think Filipino people want. And that is such a huge thing for me.
I think Leo brings up a very good point about the fact that we can't be particularly sensitive about the kind of topics that we're touching on. When we center on people that are at the margins, oftentimes you're going to bring in a lot of different topics that a lot of different people have different opinions on. And that kind of touches back to your point of, you know, even within our own community, that sense of belonging sometimes is missed because we all have different perspectives. I mean, over 7,000 islands, right? Culturally, the geography, it makes us different. You know, there are different types of Filipinos, and there are different, and similarly in the diaspora, you've got so many different people that have so many different developing perspectives about what it means to be Filipino, what it means to be Filipino American, or what it means to be a Filipino in any other country in the world. And so, you know, I think part of what we're trying to do when we develop something like Breaking the Taboo is to really highlight that we're all about the social dialogue. And I think that we found that even internally between, you know, the first episode about Filipinos in Hollywood and calling them brown Asians, and then one article that we just released where there's actually a hot take on should Filipinos even be calling themselves brown Asians. You know, we've got all these different perspectives within the community, and I think the most important part of everything that we do is opening up that space for a conversation to happen. You know, we might not be completely sensitive and completely 100% correct all the time, but I think that leaves a little bit of a gap, an opportunity for people to engage and say, hey, I have a different opinion about this. And then let that conversation take a course of its own and develop into kind of a communal understanding of, okay, so this is actually a process that we all need to unpack, that we all need to understand. You know, getting someone into the conversation about what it means to be Filipino is completely different than someone who's been in this conversation for 5, 6, 7 years and has a more nuanced understanding of the topics that are at play. But kind of being able to zoom out and say, okay, you know, we need to look at this from every possible angle, deliver questions that the audience can engage with and answer, and then be able to respond to those questions by continuing to create content that addresses the further concerns of our audience. So that's kind of the biggest thing that I've gathered from our work with BTT is that we really need to focus on this as a process, and be able to meet our viewers halfway with their process and be able to incorporate all the different angles within the community because, you know, like I said, we're so different. from those 7,000 plus islands to everyone that's across the world. You know, the number one export of the Philippines is people. And so that leaves a lot of room for a lot of different perspectives to come in.
Yeah, and I can totally tell that you all considered so many of these different perspectives because, and you can see this reflected in the way that people are responding because, you know, on my page, we have people from all over the world and there are so many people who are not Filipino who are connecting with it and saying, hey, you know, like I'm not Filipino, but I totally get this part that you were talking about. And I think that's so important when, you know, in terms of communicating what your community is dealing with, because at the nucleus of it, so many communities, especially marginalized communities, deal with similar things. Not to say that our, you know, Filipino immigration story is the same as, you know, an African immigrant story, but there are things that are related. And I think that a lot of the questions that you have and the discussions that you bring forth leave things open-ended. There's definitely this air of, you know, you're not all trying to pose yourselves as like, okay, we're these experts that know everything, but we have these different perspectives that we'd like to go ahead and bring up. And I love that you're starting the conversation because now you're starting to see in the people who are sharing and commenting that they're picking up that conversation and taking it somewhere else.
I think talking about like, so breaking the taboo, we were fortunate enough that Kumu actually helped us fund this project. So we're super fortunate about that. The great thing about working with a specific partner like Kumu was that they really trusted us, right? So for me, I work with a lot of clients and sometimes clients could be very like hands-on and very not trustworthy of your type of content you're creating. What I love about Kumu was that they were like, do your thing and we're here to support you. And what's great about that is that they use their community of different Kumu users to really engage with our content and really drive the conversation, continue to drive the conversation. And I really love seeing that because it's really nice to see people from around the world who are Kumu users who are interacting with our content. And you see like YouTube videos of them also talking about the videos that we launched. Wow. That's really amazing. And in terms of something that I really like from all the Breaking the Taboo videos, one of them is the one of them that stood out to me the most is the Filipino American History Month one, the episode 2. Mm-hmm. Because I think, number one, for me, I generally, growing up, I never had like any sort of media where I could learn about Filipino history. A Filipino American History Month, right? Mm-hmm. So when I remember back in high school, I don't think it was really discussed in like history books or anything. Mm-hmm. And I think just thinking about the younger kids who have access to internet, who are actually on YouTube, who are curious to learn about their Filipino American History Month, they can just go on YouTube, search and find our video, and they can learn so much about our history. And I think we did it in a really tasteful way that's entertaining, but also, you know, like they could learn something out of it. So I think that's one of my favorite episodes. Personally, I don't really like history. I'm not a history person, but I think, you know, it's really nice because this really appeals to like the younger kids too. Like if I was younger and I was really curious to learn about my history, you know, this is perfect. So yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, to your point about, you know, positioning and framing the content in a way that is approachable, you know, as someone who's been talking about race and politics and topics that a lot of people don't want to talk about, that are depressing and upsetting, it's hard to bring up these issues and get meaningful conversations, because sometimes you can talk about anti-blackness or colorism and, you know, some people will be like, why are you talking about this? You know, we shouldn't be divisive. We shouldn't be talking about these things. There are better things that we can be discussing. But by, you know, having these conversations in an entertaining and informative way, you inspire and allow people to be like, you know what? I haven't learned about Filipino history. I haven't really asked myself why my family wants me to use papaya soap. Like, so there's all these different things that I know that Filipino people are asking themselves and thinking about and contemplating, but they just don't have that opportunity. And you, by creating this series, created that opportunity.